One of the new features of SQL Server 2008 integration services is the ability to do cache transformations and cache lookups that are all cached. So you have this cache connection manager, C-A-C-H-E, cache, and it allows you to store lookup values so that you can either repeatedly access them or you can just access them very, very quickly in the pipeline. Now this is new. I do want to say, before I get much deeper, if you don't know what lookups are, this isn't the video for you. I'm going to assume that's prior knowledge. I just got through recording 2 videos on what a lookup is. They're right before this video in the course. Might be best if you watch those videos to make sure you understand what a lookup is prior to watching this. Okay, so the idea of doing a lookup is not new. We've done this in all versions of the ETL tools. 7.0, 2000, we still had options to do this. We had the lookup options in DTS, but they were incredibly slow. SSIS 2005 was a little bit faster, but it still wasn't super fast. It brought some better caching options, some better performance, but it still wasn't super fast. So in SQL Server 2008, the development team looked at that as a definite way to improve. It used to be in the old DTS class. In fact, if you've taken my DTS course, I explained, here's how to do lookups in DTS, but don't use them. Here's a better way to do it. Load it up into a text file and then load that in and join from a SQL table, because it was just so slow to do the lookups. Well, why is it so slow, potentially, to do a lookup? Well, think about it. Let's say, and maybe I'll write this down, maybe it'll require little visuals here. So let's say that we have a source of 10 million rows, and we have a lookup table of 500,000 unique keys, unique rows here. Well, remember that a lookup transform is a once per source row event. Okay, so a lookup transform is a do the lookup one time for each source row. That's basically what a lookup transformation's going to accomplish for you. So 10 million different times you're looking up data in 500,000 rows. And if that information is not cached well, then it's going to have to continually go back to that source and run a 500,000 row query for each of the 10 million output rows. Right? Not efficient if we have to do that. So what we're trying to do, or what the development team has given us the option for in 2008, is to cache this lookup information. So this, in SSIS 2008, you're going to use now a cache connection manager, and you're going to define the cache. I hope that shows up. I'm sorry if it doesn't. As I'm looking at it, I've got the sun coming on my screen, and let me shut my blind. If it says cache connection manager, I'm sorry if it doesn't really show up there. There we go. Maybe putting a yellow underline will help you. So this will store this in the cache. Now, where is the cache? Well, typically when we think of a cache, we think of it being in memory. And that's going to definitely be available to us. But one of the features in SSIS 2008 is that we can go either to memory or we can go to a raw file. Okay, so a file-based cache. Okay. So when I would use these is that I would use a raw file if my memory requirements would exceed the amount of memory that the SQL Server, or that particular box has. So if I have 16 gigs of memory on the machine, and I think that the amount of the source, the amount of the lookups would actually be 12 gigabytes of memory, well, that's just too much. I need to dump that out to a raw file at that point. Another reason that I might use a file-based cache is if I'm going to access this from another package. So later on in the course, we're going to talk about executing packages from within another package and how you can pass a cache from one package to another package. Okay, that's when I would use a file. I would not be able to use a memory for that particular situation. Okay, so the cache connection memory, just so you know, it is storing that lookup information. It's not storing the source information. This idea down here, this lookup transformation being done once per each source row, you're basically given the choice. Do I want to go back to the lookup data, or do I want to do it from the cache connection manager? Which is more efficient? So let's actually do this. I'm going to show you how it works, and then in the next video we'll actually wire it up and we'll use Excel as the lookup value here. So I'm just going to launch the Visual Studio, and this is a situation where you actually need two data flows. So this is kind of weird. Let me load this up. So step one, let's add some annotations. Step one, load up the cache. Okay. So to do that, I use a data flow task. So I'm just going to call it load cache. Okay. And in my data flow, I go in here and I choose, what I'm choosing right here is the lookup data. So where does my lookup information come from? That's what my source over here is going to be. So make a source connection to your lookup data. And so I don't know, I don't have anything in mind for this one yet, but I'm going to just use this, make a new connection to, we'll use AdventureWorks, and I would say I will choose the table department, human resources department. So you see it here, it's got a department ID and the name. Okay, now step two, let me increase this and I'll say step one, and I'll save this with this video so that you have it. And then step two will be to add my cache transform. So step two, load the cache with a cache transform. Or here you see cache transform, transformation really is the technical term, but there it is. Okay. So now I go from the source to the cache transform, double click, and I have to make a cache connection manager. So I say new, and this is where I get the choice to use that file cache. Okay, so if I use the file cache down here, it's going to create a raw file, which is actually going to have the extension CAW, so it's a cache file. So I'm actually going to just, by not checking that box, it uses memory. And just a reminder, when would I use this? I would use it pretty much in two cases. One, when I think that the memory requirements of my lookup are too large. Or two, when I want to pass this cache to another package. I'm not going to use a file cache. Okay. Notice that it picks up the columns, and we need to define our index positions here. This is how we define the uniqueness of our cache. Okay, so I'm going to say that this is the first column in the unique index. And that's really the only one in my unique index. So effectively, this column is my primary key. So I say OK, set my mappings up. You see that little icon right there? That's telling us that that's an index key. That's a lookup value here. It's eligible for a lookup column. I say OK. And I've done. I have loaded the cache now. And the second part is now bring another data flow to use cache to load, in a lookup. So I would now go into my data flow, and now I define my actual source. So you remember when we talked about lookups, you had a source and then you had the lookup? Well, you've predefined what the lookup is going to be. So now you define your source. So here's my source, and gosh, what did we make? I can't. I don't really have anything here. I'm just going to show something from AdventureWorks here. And so my source would be employee. Because employee references this, doesn't it reference the department ID? No, 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 not you. Where is it? Employee department history. That one does, because there we have the department ID. So we want to use some type of a lookup for this. This is really not an example that I would use necessarily a lookup for, because this is all in the same database. But my point really here is to show you how to load the cache prior to using it. And now when we bring in, I'm back in my data flow to use the cache. Now when I bring in my lookup, when I go use it, now I can choose that I want to use the cache connection manager. Okay. So now I go to the connection and it picks up the cache connection manager that I've chosen, and I don't have to define anything else down here. I can now say which columns match up, and so the little icon is present again. That tells me that's one that we can use as an available lookup. And so I say here is it, and I want to actually look up the name of the department. So I'm going to call this department name. And so sweet, I'm going to now do a fake destination here. So I'm going to add a variable, calling it fake stuff. It's an int 32, and I'm going to put in a row count. If you don't know how to do this or what I'm doing, we've done this previously in the earlier video on how to create a fake or a trash destination. I'm basically setting the output of this to store the count of the rows in a variable that I'll never use, so that I can just dump in a data viewer, and the data viewer will allow me to see the data as it comes out of the lookup. So coming out of the source, we add a new column, and we put that new column here, calling it department name. So we have now added that based on that cached lookup. And that's all there is to it. You're going to use these whenever you're dealing with lots and lots of rows in your lookup. That's the best time to use these.